Marjorie Taylor Greene thought her $22 million secret was safe in Costa Rica. But Donald Trump just turned a Rome, Georgia town hall into the brutal autopsy of her political career. $22 million from privileged market deals, a $5 million estate concealed beneath the vibrant tropical foliage of Costa Rica, and those hollow, snickering chuckles exchanged upon the couches of the liberal corporate press. The cost to purchase the dignity and integrity of a lady who formerly labeled herself a champion proves to be incredibly inexpensive. Ponder those digits, while the gloom still hovers above this platform. Ponder the treason of every pledge delivered to the citizens of Georgia. The theater lamps inside this community center in Rome abruptly burst into a dazzling pale brilliance, slicing across the darkness like a tactical assault. The illumination strikes Marjorie Taylor Greene directly in the eyes, rendering her fair complexion appear almost transparent, phantom-like. She remains positioned at her lectern, her digits clenching the timber so tightly the joints are turning pale. She appears like an individual who merely understood the snare has ultimately snapped shut. The ponderous, steady clatter of shining footwear reverberates across the auditorium while Donald Trump steps out from the sidelines. He offers no salutation, nor does he glance toward the lenses. He strides, carrying the intentional, overwhelming gravity of an individual arriving to claim a past due obligation. The oxygen within the space dissipates, abandoning merely the smell of ozone and the static energy of an impending catastrophe. He halts beside his personal microphone, bending intimately, his silhouette elongating over the ground until it consumes her own entirely. Marjorie, explain to these fine folks right here in Rome, Georgia, how the brew tastes in your fresh backyard. The tone is deep, raspy, and holds the command of a magistrate delivering a terminal ruling. Explain to them how it feels to gaze out upon a $5 million property in an overseas nation while they are battling to pour fuel into their vehicles. Explain to them why you chose to purchase an extravagant villa in a developing country rather than remaining here to battle for the ideals you screamed about upon the congressional floor. Greene does not cower away. Rather, she presses towards her personal microphone with a piercing, frantic ferocity. She aims a quivering digit towards the rear of the audience, her tone elevating into a screech that bounces off the ceiling beams. That is a falsehood, and you are aware of it, Mr. President. This is simply a defamation operation driven by deceitful Larry and the individuals who are envious of anyone who genuinely understands how to construct something. I have operated as a champion for this movement since the very beginning, and I refuse to allow these fabricated articles from Business Insider or the deep state propagandists to rip me apart. I auctioned my residence right here in Rome for $1.1 million in a completely lawful, independent property transaction. I have operated in the building industry my whole existence, and I attained every single cent via strenuous effort and determination. I refuse to express regret for operating as a triumphant American lady in a nation that is intended to compensate achievement. A chilly, derisive laugh shudders across the amplifiers on Trump's portion of the platform. Triumphant. You operated triumphantly at a single task, Marjorie, and that involved cashing out exactly one dawn following your acquisition of your permanent retirement fund from the taxpayers. He pivots his skull deliberately, his gaze locked upon the audience as though dispersing a painful confidence with them. She claims it involves strenuous effort, yet the documentation indicated $22 million from privileged market deals while she occupied those panels. She assures you she remains one of you. However, the minute matters became difficult, she surrendered. She relinquished her position, and she escaped to Costa Rica beneath the veil of concealment. Even her partner relinquished with zero advance notice because they were both excessively frightened to confront the repercussions of their treason. Greene's visage twists into a facade of absolute fury, her vision darting across the space, searching for a sympathetic expression that remains absent. I remain a 100% patriotic American who resides in Georgia, and traveling to Costa Rica functioned as a holiday, a journey that I possess complete authority to embark upon. I adore this nation, and I adore the wonderful citizens of Georgia. However, I refuse to be intimidated for touring the globe and sharing my existence with the partner I cherish. The individual who remains standing here, charging me with privileged market deals, ought to examine his personal administration before he begins casting rocks at my direction. The audience explodes into a deep, echoing murmur of condemnation that rattles the actual floorboards of the auditorium. Trump elevates a palm, and the space drops into a hush, so abrupt it remains deafening. You did not embark upon a holiday, Marjorie. You relocated. You auctioned your real estate. You deserted your voters, and you sprinted toward the welcoming embrace of the liberal press the minute you believed the vessel was foundering. You rested upon their knees, and you snickered alongside the ladies on The View, regarding how intensely you despise the males in Washington. You utilized the vocabulary of the progressive horde because you craved their affection more than you craved the reverence of the overlooked males and females of this nation. You are no champion. You remain a defector who deserted her station for a wage and a villa in an overseas territory. He presses forward, his stare contracting into a laser-sharp concentration that appears to affix her to the floor. A long-standing proverb exists in Washington, Marjorie. Should you desire a companion in governance, you acquire a hound. However, you act worse compared to a hound, because even a hound understands who nourishes it, and a hound understands what dedication signifies. You remain disloyal to the president, you remain disloyal to the party, and you remain undoubtedly disloyal to the individuals who are agonizing while you publish images from your property. Greene glares back toward him, her lips parting and shutting like an aquatic creature removed from moisture, the hush of her failure permeating the whole auditorium. The monitoring cabin, elevated above the ground, buzzes with the noise of the transmission broadcasting to millions of households. This functions no longer merely as a debate. This serves as the dissection of a governmental profession that decayed from the interior outward. We are observing the green transform into brown directly before our actual vision. The weighty hush of the auditorium gets shattered, not through a gavel, however by the piercing, rhythmic clack of Marjorie's footwear while she walks the compact boundary of her lectern. The ceiling illumination grabs the sparkle of her accessories, a glittering reminder of the wagers entangled in this high-stakes match of governmental cards. She pulls herself upward, jaw angled at a degree of rebellion, which implies she appears prepared to battle for every millimeter of her standing. You wish to discuss finances, Mr. President? The shriek of her tone across the amplifiers prompts a handful of individuals in the front seating to wince. You, among all individuals, desire to stand right there and educate me regarding constructing a life and a wealth within this nation? I remain a lady of the South, raised and cultivated with the scent of Georgia timber and the dirt of a building zone beneath my fingernails. My riches were not bestowed upon me inside a wooden conference room or murmured into my hearing by an operative during a beef dinner in D.C. It was constructed utilizing architectural plans, utilizing massive equipment, and utilizing the sort of spine-breaking toil that the individuals within this auditorium comprehend much better than the administrators you are encircled by currently. I grabbed a household enterprise and I transformed it into a juggernaut because I understand how to labor. I understand how to direct, and I understand how to succeed. I remain the walking representation of the American aspiration, the exact aspiration you informed us you desired to defend, and presently you intend to stand right there and insinuate that my achievement represents an offense? You intend to permit these scavengers in the press to dismantle my financial ledgers because I possessed the nerve to generate a revenue? I refuse to express regret for it. I will strictly never express regret for operating as a triumphant corporate lady who understands the worth of a dollar and how to multiply it. Should generating revenue be a transgression, then 50% of the individuals in Washington belong inside a cage. However, they are excessively occupied, consuming your taxpayer funds to care. She presses forward, her vision wide, scanning the audience for the recognizable flash of dedication she formerly directed so effortlessly. I constructed residences. I constructed neighborhoods, and subsequently, I traveled to Washington to construct a tomorrow for my constituents. And indeed, I auctioned my real estate. I auctioned it because I remain an independent citizen, holding the authority to direct my belongings however I deem appropriate. Is that not what we advocate for currently? Have we grown so radicalized that a lady cannot auction her personal residence without being charged with escaping the nation, akin to a common outlaw? Trump stays completely motionless, his limbs crossed over his torso, his demeanor inscrutable save for that subtle hunting arc near the edge of his lips. He refuses to interject. He refuses to yell. He merely observes her, the manner a feline observes, a feathered creature that has currently crashed into a fastened pane. The storyteller's tone slices across the strain, akin to a freezing blade. She is skilled, isn't she? She relies upon the self-made narrative, akin to a gospel chorus. Wishing the sawdust on her footwear from 20 years ago will mask the aroma of the perfume she is sporting nowadays. However, the architectural plans she discusses currently are not meant for residences in Rome, Georgia. They remain intended for an exit tactic that might cause a Houdini to flush. She is striking at shadows, attempting to provoke the lion into a bellow, so she might assert she is facing persecution. However, the lion remains silent for now. He merely calculates the seconds until the timer expires on her performance. Trump eventually uncrosses his arms, shifting his mass with a sluggish, intentional elegance that orders the whole gathering to retain its breath. It is a beautiful narrative, Marjorie. His tone remains fluid, practically conversational, which renders it tenfold more terrifying. The building, the architectural plans, the diligent lady of the South. I adore that narrative. I have recounted narratives akin to that my entire existence, and generally, they hold truth. However, there exists a distinction between a triumphant narrative and a getaway narrative, and yours appears starting to resemble a very expensive script for a movie nobody wishes to watch. You discuss the American dream. However, the American dream generally involves remaining within America to relish it. He moves a step nearer towards the border of the stage, the light catching the gold of his tie. Assist me in understanding the calculations, because the individuals here act very intelligent, and they prefer math that adds up. You dedicated your period in Congress discussing the forgotten individual, discussing the struggle, discussing how the system is rigged. And then abruptly, the moment you secure that permanent retirement fund, that gold-plated, taxpayer-funded check, that most individuals inside this room shall never even view a fraction of you. Determine you have had enough. You relinquish your seat, you pack your luggage, and you sell the very land you asserted represented your soul. That proves a highly convenient time to discover you are tired of Washington, isn't it? The ink was not even dry on your pension documents before you were browsing real estate listings 5,000 miles away. Greene's jaw clenches, a pulse thumping in her neck while she attempts to locate a fracture within his logic. I fulfilled my tenure, and I completed my job. I do not owe anyone an explanation for when I choose to retire. Trump elevates a hand, silencing her with a flick of his wrist. Oh, I believe you certainly do. You owe an explanation to the individuals who waited in lines for hours to vote for a fighter, merely to discover their fighter functioned actually just as a real estate investor searching for a tax haven. And additionally, there remains Brian. Brian Glenn, a talented guy, a reporter, somebody who was supposed to be telling the truth to the American people. He resigns with zero advance notice. No 2-week warning, no farewell broadcast, strictly a disappearing act that might cause a ghost to feel jealous. And subsequently, what do you know? You are both in Costa Rica, not for a weekend getaway, not at a Marriott, however inside a $5 million mansion that resembles something directly out of a James Bond movie. A mansion funded, some individuals say, by the $22 million you managed to pull out of the market while you were busy building things in Washington. The timing is just so incredible, Marjorie. It feels like a miracle of finance. You quit, he quits, the house gets sold. And abruptly, you are sipping coffee, overlooking a private estate in a country where the U.S. government has a very hard time asking questions. The hall remains so quiet presently that the hum of the air conditioning sounds like a roar. Is that what America First means currently? Does it mean me first? And then Costa Rica? Because if you wanted to leave, you should have strictly stated so. You could have told these people, look, I have made my millions, I possess my pension, and I am bored of Georgia. That would have been honest. However, you didn't do that. You kept wearing the hat, you kept taking the donations, and you kept pretending to be a patriot while you were busy checking the exchange rate for the Costa Rican colon. Greene appears shaking presently, her hands trembling so violently she must hide them behind the podium. You are twisting everything. I am an American citizen, and I possess the right to live where I want. I love Georgia. I will eternally love Georgia. However, I won't stay here strictly to be a punching bag for your ego. Trump releases a short, sharp laugh that doesn't reach his eyes. You aren't a punching bag, Marjorie. You're a kite. And honestly, you're doing us a favor by leaving. The movement is better off devoid of individuals who use patriotism as a marketing slogan for their next real estate flip. If you want to live inside a mansion in a third world country while the people who believed in you are struggling to pay their rent, go ahead. Enjoy the weather. Enjoy the coffee. However, don't you dare come back here and try to wrap yourself in the flag after you used it as a napkin to wipe the grease off your hands. You didn't leave because you grew tired of the fight. You left because you won the lottery at the taxpayers' expense, and you were excessively cowardly to stay and look them in the eye. He turns away from her dismissively, as though she has previously ceased to exist in his world. You're doing America a favor by getting out of the way. Simply ensure the door doesn't hit you on the way to the airport, because I'd hate for you to have to use that pension upon a doctor's bill before you get to the beach. The roar from the crowd functions no longer as a rumble. It represents a landslide of noise, a tidal wave of realization that the woman they formerly cheered for has previously moved on to a life they cannot even imagine. Greene stands frozen, the lights of the town hall feeling less like a spotlight and more like an interrogation lamp that has ultimately exposed the truth. The narrator's voice returns, dripping with freezing satisfaction. There it is, folks. The shield of business shattered into a million pieces of broken glass. She thought she could hide behind a ledger. However, she forgot that the people know the difference between a profit and a payoff. $22 million doesn't strictly fall out of the sky unless you happen to be holding a very large bucket beneath a very specific leak in the Capitol dome. And the mansion? That's not a home. That's a fortress built on the ruins of a broken promise. Shay's not a citizen of Georgia anymore. Shay's a citizen of her own greed, and the border to that country stands closed to anyone who genuinely cares about this nation. The knife of withdrawal didn't merely cut her out of the movement. It cut the mask directly off her face. And the face beneath it fails to look like a warrior. It looks like someone who's merely realized that in the game of loyalty, she remains the only one who ended up alone. The atmosphere in the town hall shifts from a freezing interrogation into something vastly more toxic, a heavy fog of political posturing and desperate victimhood. Marjorie Taylor Greene adjusts her position behind the podium, her eyes narrowing while she realizes the financial ledger has morphed into a noose. She tosses her hair back, a rehearsed gesture of defiance that looks more like a nervous tick beneath the severe fluorescent lights. The silence functions no longer as her friend, therefore she grabs the microphone like a lifeline, her voice dropping into a register of practiced grievance. You know, I expected this from the media. However, I didn't expect it from you, Mr. President. She lets out a sharp, cynical breath. However, I suppose it's strictly the way it operates in Washington, isn't it? It's constantly about the men and their ego, constantly about who holds the biggest platform or the loudest shout. The crowd rumbles, a mix of confusion and burgeoning irritation regarding the sudden change in tone. I'm standing here facing attacks by a man I supported, utilizing everything I possessed, strictly because I decided to speak my truth to a different audience. I'm genuinely tired of the measuring contest inside Washington, D.C. between the men. I'm tired of being told where I can go, who I can talk to, and how I should behave merely to satisfy some masculine power trip. I went on The View because I wanted to converse with women, and I stand with women. Therefore, I feel highly comfortable saying this. I'm really happy that I'm here with women, because unlike the back rooms of the Capitol, there's an honesty there that the men inside this town feel terrified of. The men represent the problem in D.C. They are the ones obsessed with their own power, while the rest of us are attempting to save the country. She stands taller now, trying to project the image of a feminist icon, a role she would have mocked with vitriol merely 6 months ago. Donald Trump doesn't move a muscle. However, his eyes flicker with a dangerous, amused light. He stands right there, the undisputed heavyweight champion of political combat, watching a featherweight try to change the rules of the game in the middle of a knockout round. The narrator's voice cuts through the static, dripping with the cynicism of a man who has witnessed every PR stunt inside the book. Listen to that sound, patriots. That represents the sound of the progressive virus infecting a host during live action. She's reaching for the gender card because she knows the money card represents a loser. She's utilizing left-wing coded language, the sort of rhetoric designed by HR departments and liberal sociology professors to shut down debate. Yesterday she acted as the MAGA warrior. Today she acts as the persecuted sisterhood representative. It functions as a transformation so fast, it would give you whiplash if it wasn't so incredibly pathetic. Trump finally shatters his silence. His voice functions as a low, rumbling thunder that causes the microphone stand to vibrate. Look at this expression, Marjorie. You're standing right there, utilizing left-wing coded language, immediately adopting progressive ideologies the moment you acquire a paycheck from the opposing side. It proves amazing how immediately you begin utilizing their words, their phrases, their tiny talking points regarding men being the problem. You rested upon their knees and you giggled and tee-heed on The View alongside women who hate every single person inside this room. You wandered toward the open arms of the left-wing corporate media that hates all of us, and you tried to burn this location down. He takes a slow step toward her, his presence expanding until it seems to fill every corner of the stage. The measuring contest, Marjorie. Is that what you call it currently? You didn't seem to mind the measuring contest when you remained flattering the president near his golf course. You didn't seem to mind congregating alongside the men when you remained acquiring power or fame from it. You acted highly close with President Trump back then. weren't you? You sported that Trump was right about everything hat upon the House floor, because it rendered you the star of the show. You adored remaining inside the room with the men when you were the one holding the spotlight. However, now that those days are over, abruptly, the men are the problem. Now that you've cashed out and bought your $5 million mansion, suddenly Washington feels excessively masculine for you. Greene's eyes flash with a desperate, cornered energy, her hands slamming onto the podium. I am allowed to evolve, Mr. President. I am allowed to realize that the way we were doing things was failing. The View was willing to listen to me. They were willing to give me a platform that wasn't strictly another echo chamber. Trump scoffs, a sound of pure, unadulterated disgust. They didn't listen to you, Marjorie. They used you. They wanted a trophy. They wanted a defector they could parade around to show that the movement was crumbling apart, and you gave it to them for the price of a smile and a seat near the table. You transitioned from giggling with Trump at a golf course to giggling alongside The View regarding how much you hate the people who put you in office. It's not existential to you, is it? It's not about the future of the children or the country or the people who currently have to fight. You quit. You ran directly toward The View, and you told them exactly what they wanted to hear. You used to tell me during rallies. You told the people in Rome that mass deportations should occur. You stated it on my show countless times. You shouted it from the rooftops. However, now that you're alongside your new friends, now you believe we have to protect the criminal alien workers, provided they remain working. It proves amazing what happens when you want the warm, coddling love of left-wing media. Greene tries to speak. However, the words catch in her throat, while the crowd's silence turns into a low, menacing hiss. She looks out toward the faces of her former supporters, people who remember her fire and her promises, and all she sees reflects a reflection of her personal betrayal. The narrator leans in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. Did you catch that? The moment the mask slipped and revealed the pure, unvarnished opportunism underneath. She's not a victim of a measuring contest. She's a victim of her personal desire to be liked by the people who despise her. She traded her principles for a paycheck inside a mansion in Costa Rica, and now she's trying to tell you it functioned as a spiritual journey toward womanhood. It serves as a masterclass regarding the double standards of the swamp. When they want your vote, they act as the bravest soldiers on the battlefield. When they possess your money, they are merely tired women who want to talk about their feelings on the talk show. Trump continues, his voice gaining a sharp, rhythmic edge. You're complimenting Nancy Pelosi presently, Marjorie. You're very impressed regarding her ability to get things done. Aren't you? Impressed regarding her ability to screw over my party, to screw over your voters, your constituents. You're impressed regarding her ability to get Obamacare done, the exact thing we've been struggling to tear down for a decade. Is that what you talked about over coffee in Costa Rica? How much you admire the people who are trying to destroy this country? Ilhan Omar says she wants to start a new party alongside you, Marjorie. She wants to welcome you into the Democrat Party and reconstitute it. That's quite a friend to have for someone who claims to be America first. Greene's posture sags for a fraction of a second before she drags herself back upright, a hollow shell of the woman she formerly was. I am building bridges, Mr. President. I am trying to find a way to move forward without the constant anger and the constant fighting. Trump laughs once more, and this time the crowd joins him. A bitter, mocking sound that fills the hall. You aren't building bridges, Marjorie. You're building an escape hatch. You appear on CNN again and again and again, doing reporting for them, helping them spin their lies. You act as a traitor to this movement, and everyone on both the right and the left hates you currently because you possess zero credibility. You destroyed yourself, Marjorie. And you did it for a house inside the tropics and a teh on a morning show. You believe you stand above us currently, don't you? Rage posting from your lavish mansion in the third world while countless Americans remain suffering. That represents a choice, and it functions as a nasty one. He turns his back on her again, looking directly into the main camera lens, his face a portrait of grim determination. Don't act like Marjorie, ladies and gentlemen. Whatever you execute, live out your principles, and make sure you don't sell your soul for a pretty view. Because at the end of the day, it fails to matter how pretty the mansion is if the person residing inside feels like garbage. Greene stands isolated in the spotlight, the echo of the laughter still ringing inside her ears. A ghost within her own hometown. The bridges are burnt, patriots. The woman who promised to fight for you has officially defected to the opposing side. She's traded the measuring contest of Washington for the coddling love of the elites. However, she forgot one thing. In the real world, loyalty isn't a strategy. It represents a requirement, and once you forfeit it, no amount of money in Costa Rica may ever buy it anew. The deep state got their trophy. However, the people got the truth, and the truth is the Greene has completely rotted. The boos from the crowd in Rome, Georgia function no longer as a low rumble. They are a deafening wall of sound that vibrates against the walls of the hall. Marjorie Taylor Greene flinches, her eyes darting across the sea of faces that formerly looked at her holding adoration, but presently carry strictly the cold sting of rejection. She grips the sides of the podium, her knuckles white, her chest heaving, while she tries to locate the oxygen to fight back against the man who constructed her, and presently remains unmaking her prior to the world. I am still a legislator, Mr. President, and I must live within the world of reality. Her voice cracks upon the high notes, a sharp, desperate sound that merely invites more mockery from the stands. You can't merely ignore the people who genuinely know how to wield the gavel and shift the needle inside Washington. Donald Trump fails to even blink. He simply leans into the microphone, carrying the relaxed posture of a man who has previously won the argument. The world of reality, Marjorie? Is that what you call it when you go on CNN and tell the world how intensely you admire the woman who tried to destroy our movement? Because I viewed the transcript, everyone viewed the post, and frankly, it felt nauseating. Why would you travel out of your path to state you were very impressed regarding Nancy Pelosi's ability to get things done? Was her first term in Congress what genuinely blew you away, or was it later when she operated busy screwing over my party and my voters? Are you that impressed regarding her ability to ruin the people inside this room? The exact constituents you claim to represent? Greene tries to interject, her hands waving dismissively as though she might brush the words out of the air. It represented a professional observation regarding legislative efficiency and nothing further. I don't need to like her to acknowledge that she knows how to run a caucus. The narrator's voice rolls in, thick with a sarcasm that feels akin to sandpaper upon a fresh wound. Legislative efficiency. That functions as the new term for selling out your personal side in the vocabulary of the newly enlightened. She desires you to believe that she's merely acting as a student of the game, a neutral observer of the political process. However, we know differently, don't we? Patriots, you avoid praising the person who dedicated 4 years attempting to put your leader inside a cage, unless you remain looking for a seat near her dinner table. She's not observing the game, she's applying for a job on the opposing team. Trump's eyes narrow, and he shakes his head, carrying a look of profound disappointment that feels weightier than a shout. You acted very impressed regarding her ability to get Obamacare done, didn't you? The exact Obamacare that has functioned as a disaster for every family in Georgia. The exact item we promised to repeal and replace. However, I guess when you're residing inside a $5 million mansion in Costa Rica, you don't genuinely worry regarding the cost of health insurance in Rome, Georgia, do you? It remains easy to feel impressed regarding the destruction of the American middle class when you've already secured your $22 million golden parachute. However, let's discuss something vastly more important to the people here, something you formerly screamed regarding until your voice went hoarse. Let's discuss the border, Marjorie, because I remember the rallies. I visited them. I stood there while you told thousands of people that we needed mass deportations. You stated it upon my show. You stated it in the halls of Congress. You stated it every time a camera was pointed toward your face. Mass deportations regarding the people who remain, breaking our laws and draining our resources. That represented the promise, correct? MTG shifts her weight, her face turning a deep shade of red that rivals the carpets of the hall. The situation remains complex, and the labor market holds requirements that we must consider if we want the economy to stay afloat. I remain acting as a realist regarding the workforce we previously possess in place. Trump releases a sharp, barking laugh that cuts her off mid-sentence. A realist? No. You remain acting as a fraud, and you execute it because you possess a new audience currently. Now you visit podcasts and you inform people that we must protect the criminal alien workers, strictly provided they remain working. Suddenly, the law fails to matter. The border fails to matter. And the safety of American citizens fails to matter. Strictly provided the corporate masters who remain coddling you and the left-wing media are happy. You're happy to permit the country to burn. What occurred to the warrior who wanted to save our children's future? What occurred to the woman who claimed we were facing an invasion? Inform you what occurred. You acquired a paycheck. You desired to be famous, and you craved the warm, coddling love of the people who hate the people inside this room. You abandoned your principles the moment they morphed into an obstacle to your lifestyle within the third world. Greene slams her hand down upon the podium, the sound echoing akin to a gunshot through the silent hall. I have not abandoned anyone. I remain trying to discover a solution that genuinely works instead of strictly shouting into the wind for the remainder of my life. I am tired of the fighting, and I am tired of the men who believe that anger functions as a substitute for policy. Trump executes a slow, menacing step toward her, his shadow looming over her like an eclipse. It remains not regarding anger, Marjorie. It remains regarding results. And you merely confessed you feel impressed regarding the results of the opposing side. You remain praising Pelosi. You remain protecting illegal workers. And you remain executing it from a mansion in Costa Rica, while the people of Georgia are abandoned holding the bill. You're not fighting for anyone excluding yourself. And you're not America first. You're Marjorie's bank account first. You represent a traitor to this movement, and you represent a traitor to the country that handed you everything. And the worst portion remains. You believe you act smart enough to lie to us regarding it while you giggle alongside the view. The narrator returns, his voice a low, raspy snarl that signals the end of the round. The treachery stands finalized. She transitioned from the front lines of the revolution to the back pocket of the establishment in historic time. She desires to protect the illegal workers currently because her fresh neighbors in Costa Rica likely consider it compassionate. However, here inside the real world, within the America she deserted behind, it gets labeled a betrayal. She feels impressed regarding Pelosi because she has ultimately grasped that the swamp represents where the currency resides, and she remains prepared to sacrifice your borders, your jobs, and your future to maintain her fresh lifestyle afloat. The mask hasn't merely slipped. It has been torn off and trampled. And what remains represents a woman who swapped her soul for a paycheck and a view of the Pacific. The shadows of betrayal possess nowhere remaining to hide beneath the blazing stadium lights of this Rome, Georgia town hall. Marjorie Taylor Greene remains positioned there. However, she acts no longer as the warrior this movement previously recognized. Her expensive makeup remains streaked with sweat, revealing a face ravaged by a toxic cocktail of panic and guilt. She clings to the edges of the wooden podium, her hands shaking so violently, it appears akin to the sole element preventing her from collapsing. The sound of her heavy, ragged breathing echoes across the PA system, the sound of a cornered animal realizing the cage remains locked. The hall has morphed from a political gathering into a public autopsy of a career that rotted from the head downward. Donald Trump remains positioned near the contrary podium, as sturdy as a monument of granite, his eyes freezing and filled with a lethal degree of contempt. He observes the wreckage of a woman who believed she might outsmart the exact base that handed her a voice. She tries to inhale a massive breath, her eyes bloodshot and swollen from the crushing weight of the moment, and she screams, utilizing everything she possesses remaining. "You hold zero right to execute this toward me. You hold zero right to judge my patriotism." Her voice acts shrill and desperate, cracking beneath the weight of the boos cascading downward from the rafters. "I am still a proud American, and I still love Georgia, utilizing every fiber of my core. Where I go, where I live, and how I spend my hard-earned money represents my ultimate personal freedom. That fails to act as a crime. That represents the exact liberty we all pledge to protect, isn't it?" She stares downward toward the starting rows, hunting for a single nodding head. However, everything she locates represents a sea of cold, harsh stares. "Traveling the world and enjoying the fruits of my labor following decades of serving this country fails to make me a traitor." Trump slowly leans toward his microphone, and the slight predatory curve of his lips signals that the kill remains approaching. "Serving the country, Marjorie? Or serving your personal bank account?" His voice plunges into a low rumble that vibrates across the floorboards, akin to a coming earthquake. "You discuss personal freedom while you operated busy, curling up upon the sofas of the people who hate everyone inside this room. You discuss patriotism while you're preparing to authorize the most disgusting contract of betrayal within modern history." He pauses, permitting the heavy, suffocating silence to hang inside the air until her personal heartbeat feels excessively loud for the space. "You believe we don't know, Marjorie? You believe the patriots in Georgia act blind regarding what's occurring within the shadows? Why refuse to inform them regarding your fresh best friend, Ilhan Omar?" The mention of that name causes the room to go deathly silent for a fraction of a second prior to a roar of pure fury erupting. Greene's face transitions from a flushed red to a deathly translucent pale, her lips trembling, however incapable of shaping a word. "Ilhan Omar remains out there presently, parting her arms and welcoming you into the Democrat Party, isn't she? She calls you the voice of reason inside the Republican Party, which functions as the kiss of death for anyone holding a shred of honor. The pair of you are plotting a fresh party, an unholy alliance involving a defector and the radical left to tear this country apart from the inside." The screams of traitor and shame from the Georgia voters crash against the stage, akin to a physical wave of heat. They cannot grasp the woman who formerly remained positioned upon the House floor, sporting a Trump was right hat, currently facing recruitment by the squad. Trump elevates a hand to hush the crowd. However, his eyes never leave her collapsing form. "You've appeared on CNN so much lately that I remain beginning to wonder if they handed you a staff ID badge and a parking spot. You sit there and you agree alongside their lies, permitting them to use you akin to a blunt instrument to bash the MAGA movement. That hat, those promises, they represent strictly a pile of ashes, currently incinerated by your personal ego. You act as no warrior anymore, Marjorie. You represent a trophy for the deep state." a cheap tool they employ to attack the people who placed you inside power. You swapped the loyal voters of Rome for a pat on the head from Nancy Pelosi and a wink from Ilhan Omar. That represents the absolute bottom of the pit of betrayal, a place so dark that $5 million mansion in Costa Rica may supply enough light to obscure your shame. Greene's knees fold, and her hands slide from the podium, while she stares toward the emptiness, realizing her political soul has been exposed bare. Rome, Georgia, remains no longer her residence. It represents the location where her hypocrisy ultimately encountered its equal. The narrator's voice returns, slick and sharp, akin to a razor, securing the lid upon the coffin. There exists zero returning from this. Folks, when you swap the people who handed you everything for the applause of the people who desire to destroy them, you remain finished. She believed she remained playing a high-stakes game of chess. However, she forgot that inside this movement, loyalty acts as the singular currency that matters. The green has morphed to brown, and the stench of it remains occupying every corner of the swamp. The unholy alliance sits exposed within the clearing, and the patriots remain finished hearing the excuses of a quitter. The temperature inside the Rome town hall plunges to a degree where you might practically observe the breath of the people inside the starting row. The silence acts no longer as an absence of sound. It represents a heavy, suffocating weight that crushes downward upon everyone inside the space. Marjorie Taylor Greene appears akin to, she remains positioned upon the border of a jagged cliff, and the wind remains beginning to howl. She realizes that the standard slogans and the rehearsed smiles fail to remain destined to rescue her from the man positioned 10 feet distant. Her eyes shift from panic to predatory, while she reaches for the most desperate weapon within the politician's handbook, the smear of deflection. She bends so deeply toward the microphone that the audio feedback releases a sharp, ear-piercing whine. I have previously informed you, and I will inform these people once more. I have strictly never participated inside any insider trading. Every singular dollar of my wealth was acquired via my construction business, a company I built utilizing my personal twin hands and my personal sweat. I refuse to express regret for making money inside a business I worked within for decades, and I refuse to permit you to use these fake reports to turn me into a villain. You desire to discuss corruption and trading secrets? Why fail we observe the people inside the Trump administration instead? Why fail we discuss the insiders encircling you who operated executing maneuvers while the rest of us operated genuinely trying to legislate? You remain utilizing me as a shield to hide the corruption inside your personal backyard. The crowd releases a shared gasp, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock regarding the audacity of the accusation. Trump fails to flinch. He fails to even blink. He remains positioned there completely motionless, permitting her words to hang inside the air, akin to a bad smell that declines to dissipate. The narrator's voice surges in, cold and precise, akin to a surgeon preparing for the final incision. Observe her proceed. She remains flinging mud against the walls, wishing some of it sticks to the people who genuinely remained beside her when the world remained attempting to cancel her. She remains utilizing the left-wing media shield, the exact identical tactic the Democrats employ when they face capture, holding their hands inside the cookie jar. Don't stare at me, stare at them. It represents the oldest trick inside the book, and it acts as the hallmark of a guilty conscience. She believes she might triumph by burning the entire house completely. However, she forgot that she remains the singular one fastened indoors. Trump eventually shifts, stepping toward the exact border of his podium, his voice dropping into a register that acts quiet, deadly, and final. It acts as a nasty move, Marjorie, to attack the people who worked for the country while you operated busy working the stock market. It functions as a coward's move, and it represents exactly why the fake news media remains destined to adore you approaching morning. You remain handing them exactly what they desire. A MAGA Republican turning into a snake the moment she faces entrapment. However, let's revert toward the facts, because the facts decline to care about your construction business fairy tale, $22 million. That represents the number hanging around your neck, akin to a millstone. While the people inside this room operated losing their jobs and watching their small businesses collapse downward, your account operated growing akin to a weed inside the swamp. You executed it entirely beneath the guise of acting as a patriot, entirely while wearing that hat and shouting my name. However, the moment you hit the jackpot, the moment that 22 million rested, secured, you surrendered. You resigned your seat because you lacked the requirement for the people of Georgia anymore. You utilized them akin to a ladder to get toward the gold, and subsequently, you kicked the ladder backward. Greene's voice acts as a screech of pure desperation currently, echoing off the high ceilings. I am a 100% proud American who lives in Georgia, and indeed, I bought property inside Costa Rica. And indeed, Brian and I adore it there. It functions as a beautiful country, holding beautiful people. We adore to travel across the entire globe, and we shouldn't possess to hide that. It acts as a choice to share our lives, and I am not prepared to permit you to turn a vacation home into some sort of international conspiracy. Trump aims a finger directly toward her, his gaze unwavering. It fails to represent a vacation home when you sell your house in Rome, Georgia, and escape the country. Marjorie, it fails to represent a vacation when your boyfriend resigns holding zero advance notice and disappears alongside you. You sold 10 acres of Georgia soil for $1.1 million and traded it for a $5 million mansion inside a foreign land. You abandoned your constituents, you abandoned your nation, and you executed it for a lavish lifestyle inside a third world country. How dare you label yourself America First while you remain rage posting from a mansion inside Costa Rica? While Americans remain suffering, while they remain struggling against inflation and a broken border, you remain sipping coffee and showing off your wealth directly into people's faces. That fails to represent a choice of success. That represents a choice of a nasty, corrupt scumbag who has lost absolute respect regarding the people she served. You remain not fighting for anyone, Marjorie. You act strictly as an additional quitter who sprinted backward the moment things got tough, or the moment you acquired your lifelong pension. You remain one of the most corrupt scumbags of the century, and the people of Georgia view you for exactly what you represent. Greene remains positioned there frozen, the weight of the $22 million verdict ultimately crushing the life outside of her defense. The narrator's voice returned, somber and final, akin to the ceiling of a tomb. There exists zero, coming back from the truth when it acts this cold. She tried to blame the administration. She tried to blame the media. However, she failed to explain away the mansion or the money. She thought she might act as a MAGA star and a swamp insider concurrently. However, you can't serve dual masters. And Marjorie Taylor Greene chose the one that compensates inside colon and coffee. The water failed to merely break the glass. It flooded the entire house. The verdict sits, decided, and the sentence represents permanent exile from the movement she betrayed. Marjorie Taylor Greene remains positioned there akin to a statue of salt, frozen inside the glare of 1,000 accusing eyes. Her mouth hangs parted. However, the fiery rhetoric that desires to find her has been extinguished by the cold weight of the evidence. She appears akin to a woman who merely understood that the $5 million mansion inside Costa Rica functions as a cage, and the door has been secured from the outside. The crowd inside Rome, Georgia, functions no longer as strictly a group of spectators. They have morphed into a unified, roaring wall of rejection. Depart! Someone screams from the rear, and the cry remains immediately adopted by 1,000 voices. Evacuate Rome! Evacuate Georgia! Return toward your mansion. The rhythm of the chant shakes the floorboards, a tribal vibration of a community that has faced betrayal by its personal member. Donald Trump pivots his torso away from her, carrying a slow, deliberate motion that signals her complete and utter irrelevance. He steps toward the exact edge of the stage, assuming the posture of a commander-in-chief who has merely concluded a successful, however grim, operation. The light catches the silver inside his hair and the steely determination inside his eyes, while he addresses the patriots who remained while she escaped. There exists an old adage inside Washington, D.C., that people generally must learn the hard way. It proceeds akin to this: if you want a friend inside politics, acquire a dog, because a dog comprehends loyalty. They decline to check the stock market prior to they decide to wag their tails for you. They decline to sell out their pack for a paycheck and a view of the Pacific Ocean. However, Marjorie Taylor Greene acts worse compared to a dog. Marjorie Taylor Greene remains not loyal to the president. She remains not loyal to her party. And she remains genuinely not loyal to anyone excluding herself. The moment she acquired the chance to sprint toward the open arms of left-wing corporate media that hates every single person inside this room, she seized it. She failed to merely walk into their studio. She rested upon their laps, and she giggled, and she tee-heed, while they tried to burn this location completely. She thought she was functioning famous. She thought she was facing acceptance by the elites. However, she remained genuinely strictly showing us her true colors. I remained highly close alongside her. We acted very close, and she operated sucking up to the president more compared to almost anyone. She wore that Trump was right about everything hat upon the House floor because she craved you to believe she acted as a fighter. However, remained I right regarding this when I began calling her Marjorie Traitor Brown? I think the people of Rome understand the answer to that. We label her that because green turns to brown when it rots, and Marjorie has rotted strictly prior to our eyes. She represents a nasty traitor toward our country, and there exists zero other way to articulate it. You notice she believed she might possess it dual paths. She believed she might collect $22 million inside insider trading while masquerading to act as a MAGA Republican. She believed she might counter-message the president at every turn and subsequently cry victim and flee the country the moment the heat became excessively high. She resigned her seat, she sold her home, and her boyfriend resigned holding zero advance notice because they remained jointly terrified regarding the truth. However, the singular person that she genuinely destroyed represented herself and her personal credibility. Presently, everybody hates her upon both the right and the left, and that represents a very lonely place to occupy. If you were America first, you would stay here, and you would fight for those principles even when it gets tough. You don't resign the day following you get your lifelong pension and subsequently travel to buy huge properties inside third-world foreign countries. That remains not fighting for anyone. That represents abandoning your nation. It fails to act as America first, to betray your president and the movement you labored to get elected the moment things got difficult. It remains certainly not America first, to be rage-posting from a lavish mansion inside the third world. While countless Americans remain struggling to put food upon the table, she represents a fraud and a quitter, and she appears to be performing a favor for America by leaving. Her career inside this movement and her career inside this town remains officially over. She burned her hat, she burned her bridge, and she burned the trust of the finest people inside this country. Trump gestures toward the exit, a final, sweeping motion that commands the air inside the hall. Don't act like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Ladies and gentlemen, Ensure you live out your principles, and ensure you know that a guilty conscience doesn't feel any superior strictly because you're resting inside a mansion. She feels akin to garbage because she chose to function as garbage, and zero amount of Costa Rican sun remains destined to change that. Greene stands inside the center of the stage, her political life ending not utilizing a bang, however utilizing the hollow silence of a woman who swapped her soul for a view shell never genuinely relish. Trump walks off the stage toward a standing ovation that threatens to take the roof off the building, leaving the traitor inside the shadows.